Exodus chapter 16 verses 2-4, and 12-15. I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "Would that we had died at the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, as we sat by our flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. But you had us into this desert to make the whole community die of famine." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will now rain down bread from heaven for you. Each day the people are to go out and gather their daily portion, thus will I test them, to see whether they follow my instructions or not. I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, in the evening twilight you shall eat flesh, and in the morning, you shall have your fill of bread, so that you may know that I the Lord, am your God." In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp. In the morning, a dew lay all about the camp, and when the dew evaporated, there on the surface of the desert were fine flakes of frost on the ground. On seeing it, the Israelites asked one another, "What is this?" for they did not know what it was. But Moses told them, "This is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." When you think about all the signs and wonders God had worked in order to free the Hebrews from Egypt, it seems strange that this reading demonstrates the Hebrews, later to become known as Israelites, unwillingness to trust that the God who freed them from their Egyptian bondage would now abandon them to die a horrible death in the desert. In order to convince the Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go, God sent 10 plagues or punishments upon Egypt. First, water was turned into blood. All the Egypt king himself saw this miracle. They saw the fish die as the blood flowed over their land, and they turned with disgust from the offensive smell of the sacred river. It was impossible for them to drink of the water of the Nile. It took a week before the water of the Nile was restored so that both man and beast could be relieved of their thirst. Yet Pharaoh would not give in. Second, frogs. Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt and frogs too numerous to number came forth. This plague got the Pharaoh's attention and he turned to Moses and Aaron for help when he asked them to pray that God would remove this curse. In order to get their compliance with the prayer request, he agreed to release the once the frogs were gone, but he broke his promise and refused to let the children of Israel go. Third, bugs came out of the ground and covered the land. Even though Pharaoh's aides pointed out that this was God's punishment, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to allow the children of Israel to leave. The fourth plague to harass the Egyptians consisted of hordes of wild animals roving all over the country and destroying everything in their path. Fifth, then God sent a fatal pestilence that killed most of the domestic animals of the Egyptians. Then followed the sixth plague, which was so painful and horrible that it must have struck the people of Egypt with horror and agony because everyone was afflicted. Seventh, then came a hailstorm so strong that any one man or beast exposed to it would die. This time Pharaoh sent for Moses and acknowledged his sins, but again it was a lie. Eighth, Moses raised his arms and an east wind brought swarms of locusts into Egypt, covering the sun, and devouring everything green that had escaped the hail and previous plagues. Then followed the ninth plague. For several days all of Egypt was covered in a thick and impenetrable veil of darkness which extinguished all lights. Pharaoh became angry and ordered Moses and Aaron to leave him and never to return to the palace. The final plague is very well known to Christians, the firstborn. This final plague pushed the Pharaoh over the edge. He was now willing to unconditionally release the Hebrews. I hope you noticed that the Pharaoh sinned against God 9 times, yet God kept trying to nudge him in the right direction. Isn't that just what happens to us when we sin? God nudges us back on the path to heaven, and then forgives our sin if we ask. God had cared for the Hebrews in the Passover, the crossing of the Red Sea, the destruction of the Egyptian army, and had even provided them with fresh water in the desert. Yet the people were unable to trust that God was with them and that He would care for them along their way. The people focused their fear of hunger on Moses and Aaron and blamed them for their problems. Have you ever noticed when your children don't have one of their needs or wants met, they complain and continue to complain until they achieve their goal or find a new interest? The Israelites were no different. I'd rather be back in Egypt than to endure the hardships found in the desert. They didn't really want to be slaves back in Egypt, but it was just an attempt to achieve their goal with unjustifiable whining. Did God know they were hungry, and they were worried about food? Sure He did, He knows everything. Then why test the people? To find out how much they trust Him. They failed the test because they were more concerned with this moment in time, and their immediate needs. The people had forgotten, or didn't want to admit that they voluntarily followed Moses and Aaron into the desert at the direction of God. God had always provided what the people needed, and when they needed it. Why now would he abandon them to die in the desert? Unlike the Israelites, we must trust God's power and wisdom to help us deal with the problems that come our way. Proverbs 3 verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own insight. What needs do you have that prompt you to pray? Surrender these needs to the God who created you and don't worry, but trust in His infinite wisdom. Trust in His infinite wisdom to know how best to meet your needs. But those who trust in the Lord will become strong again. They will be like eagles that grow new feathers. They will run and not get weak. They will walk and not get tired. Isaiah 40 verse 31.